The US has said it has launched its most intensive strikes yet inside Iran as it uses its total aerial dominance to hit more precise targets. Iran responded to Donald Trump's suggestions that the war was nearly complete by saying it will continue to hit the US and Israel for as long as it takes, and vowed to block oil from leaving the Strait of Hormuz until the attacks stop.
Rescuers say at least 40 people were killed by a strike on this residential building in Tehran this morning as the US ramped up its bombing campaign.
Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard responded to Donald Trump's statement that the war was almost complete, saying only they would decide when the conflict ends, that it is now deploying projectiles in greater numbers with heavier warheads, and not 1 litre of oil would leave the region until the attacks stop. But the Pentagon said Iran is firing fewer and fewer missiles every day.
Iran stands alone, and they are badly losing. If Iran does anything to stop the flow of oil within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the United States of America 20 times harder than they have been hit thus far.
Iran's foreign minister struck a defiant tone.
We are well prepared to continue attacking them with our missiles as long as needed and as long as it takes. They thought that in a matter of 2 or 3 days, they can go for a regime change, they can go for a rapid, clean victory, but they failed.
There's certainly no clean victory, as an Iranian strike killed a woman in Bahrain and 2 people in central Israel. Tel Aviv again hit Lebanon heavily, where the UN said nearly 700,000 people have been forced from their homes. And local authorities said the death toll from the 11-day war is approaching 600. In Iran, officials said that number has surpassed 1,300, and the 7th slain US service member arrived home last night as the cost of America and Israel's attack racks up. Fergal Gallagher, RTE News.
Well, for more on this, we're joined by our Washington correspondent Jackie Fox and by our Economics and Public Affairs editor David Murphy. And Jackie, to you first in Washington, we've seen another day of heavy bombing. Last night, Donald Trump said that the war will be over pretty quickly. Are there any indications that it will be?
No, Tommy, but what was clear from that Pentagon press briefing this morning is that Trump administration officials do not want to touch at that timeline issue anymore. On numerous occasions, Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth said this war was not going to be expansive and the US knows exactly what it wants to achieve here. He was also very careful not to contradict the president after many but mixed messages when it comes to the objectives and the timeline of this operation. Now, Donald Trump said that this war will not end this week. He said it would end very soon. We do not know what very soon means. Could that be the end of next week? Could that be by the end of the month? We just do not know. What we do know is that when this operation ends, it will take weeks, if not months, to get those oil prices back down, because oil prices shoot up like a rocket, they come down like a feather. It takes time to ensure vessel safety going through the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump also threatened Iran with death, fire and fury if it disrupts the transit of oil. So even though we have this talk of the operation ending, the threat of escalation is still there.
Thanks, Jackie and David. So much uncertainty. Today, the European Energy Commissioner said that countries, where possible, should lower taxes on energy. What could the Irish government possibly do?
Well, there are a number of options facing the Irish government. Obviously, there are tax changes. They've done that in the past. There's energy credits, don't seem so likely right now. And then the social welfare measures they have extended in relation to the fuel allowance, but potentially there's another step they could do there. But for the meantime, as of this evening, the government is sticking with its wait and see policy. And that's because things are changing so fast. So if you look at the price of oil at the moment, it's trading at $83 a barrel. Yesterday, it peaked at $119 a barrel. That's a change of $36 in just over 24 hours. So things are definitely changing quickly. There are changes on the ground coming as well. We've seen home heating oil prices on average for 500 litres falling from €905 yesterday to €885 today. So the government is going to sit back and wait and see to where prices level out at before they make any decisions, because particularly in relation to taxation measures, once you've made that change, it's there. It's very difficult to take back off the table. So nothing for the meantime, but they're keeping an eye on things, they say.
All right, David Murphy, thank you. And Jackie Fox in Washington, thanks indeed.
Now, returning to the war in Iran, now in its second week. Today, according to the US, is the most intense, with the most fighters, the most bombers and the most strikes on Iran. Well, let's speak to Iranian academic Mahya Ostovar, who's based in Galway and joins us now from our studio there. Thank you for joining us on 6-1 this evening. It must be very difficult for you to see the images that you're seeing in Iran. I know you have loved ones there. Have you managed to speak to them, and what are you hearing?
Yes, thanks for having me. Yes, as you also mentioned, like what we have been hearing from Iran, from basically family and friends, is that the war has become more intensified in terms of strikes in Iran, especially on Tehran. But at the same time, what I have been hearing from friends and family, although I'm not talking on behalf of all Iranians, is that they're afraid for war, but they're more afraid also for what's going to happen after the war. Because the biggest fear of Iranian people right now, at least many of them, is that if this regime stays despite all these costs that they have paid during these years, during this war, and also 2 months ago. And we know that this fear is real because we have seen, for example, in summer after the 12-day war with Israel, they have actually took revenge from the people. They have imprisoned many people and they have executed some. So we know that fear is real, and that's going to be a tragedy for Iran if this war ends without regime change. But also, the important thing is that the news coming out of Iran is not that reliable, not very, we don't have that much information from Iran due to the internet blackout right now in Iran. And it's kind of shocking that nobody talks about it because it has been the Islamic Republic regime's strategy for years now, that during each crisis, they cut off internet and they have been able to normalize it to some extent.
And because there is an internet blackout, sorry, I don't mean to cut across you, Maya, because there is an internet blackout, no, sure, and people aren't getting information from many different sources, what do they think the objectives of this war are?
So exactly, the problem is that the regime is trying to keep people in darkness without reliable information. And at the same time, what they're trying to do is to control the narrative. Because today, for example, the government's spokesperson, Fatima Mohajerani, actually said that we will give access for internet to certain individuals, because what they're trying to do is to control the narrative that they want. But the important thing is that Iranian people, actually, especially inside Iran, they should have their own voices heard, other than different groups speaking over them with different political agendas. And that's not happening because of the internet blackout. And I want to add something important here. If it were the US or Israel who caused this internet blackout, everybody in the West would be outraged. They would be condemning it. But right now, we don't even hear about it that much in the media, and that's really shocking and awful. If anybody cares about Iranian people, they should actually pressure the Islamic Republic. First demand should be they should restore the internet. This is not normal, and it should end right now.
Iran has been pretty defiant over the past 11 days. The foreign minister has ruled out talks with the United States. A new supreme leader has been chosen. It really doesn't look like the regime has been weakened at all, does it?
Well, it's not easy to predict, and it's not easy to basically say that. But what we know is that, okay, there have been some strikes in Iran. We know that, for example, the supreme leader was killed. But the important thing is that this war is unpredictable because the actors that are involved in it are not predictable. Because let me give you a context about Iran. Because 2 months ago, what has happened was that at least 1 million of Iranians have gone outside to the street protesting against the regime, and tens of thousands of those people have been killed. And from that point, and because each cycle of protests have been crushed by violent crackdown, people have reached this conclusion that basically we need international help. We need some type of intervention. But unfortunately, different actors in the international community just condemned what has happened in Iran without any real action. And somebody like Trump easily filled that vacuum because actors like Europe stayed passive. That's why right now we need actors that actually their values are more aligned with Iranian people, with Iranian freedom fighters, that they care about democracy, they care about democratic values, to take more active role for after the war, for transition towards secular democracy. Like the European Union has used diplomacy for years with the regime and without any result. Right now, it's time to use the same tools, the same diplomatic tools to help Iranian people, to stop basically diplomatic relationships with the regime and start engaging with our opposition. For example, Reza Pahlavi, whose people have been called for. And I'm not saying that Europe should basically start endorsing anybody. No, they should engage with opposition and make them accountable for a transparent and accountable transition to secular democracy.
Mahya Ostovar, an Iranian academic based in Galway. Thank you very much for speaking to us on 6-1 this evening.
Thank you.
Taoiseach Micheál Martin has held an hour-long meeting with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez at his residence in Madrid. Both leaders discussed the current crisis in the Middle East as well as EU-US trade relations. For the latest on this, we're joined by our Europe editor, Tony Connolly. And Tony, the Taoiseach was speaking with journalists just a short time ago. What did he have to say?
Well, Tommy, this was an hour-long meeting between two leaders who have a lot in common. They've forged a common path, especially on the Middle East, jointly recognising the state of Palestine in 2024, taking a much more critical stance towards Israel over the Gaza war. Pedro Sanchez, of course, educated, learning his English in Dublin, so there are fairly strong bilateral cultural and political and economic links between the two countries. 3 million Irish visits to Spain last year. Now, Pedro Sanchez, of course, has been very forthright in condemning the US-Israeli action in Iran on the basis that a similar misadventure with Iraq over 23 years ago led to a decade of upheaval, chaos and death. And of course the Madrid train bombing attacks. By the way, the 22nd anniversary of those bomb attacks happens tomorrow. I asked the Taoiseach if he felt that was a narrative that would be acceptable to him, and on that basis should he be perhaps more robust in his condemnation or criticism of the Trump administration. This is what he had to say.
He was quite happy with the Irish position today, and we share common ground on the Middle East and have shared common ground in the Middle East for quite some time. As you know, in terms of we were together in terms of recognising the Palestinian state not so long ago, and we would have led that within the European Union, and then on a whole range of other issues we share common ground.
Well, this is really an opportunity for the Taoiseach to outline Ireland's priorities ahead of the presidency of the European Union, which starts in July, and both men will be at a summit of EU leaders in Brussels next week. Again, that will be dominated by the question of spiralling energy prices and the conflict in the Middle East, whatever point that will be at that stage.
Tony Connolly in Madrid, thanks indeed.